Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ricardo Ernst, Borat Chair in Global Business and Executive Director of the Latin America Leadership Program, Georgetown University.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos. Welcome. My name is Ricardo Ernst, and in addition to being a professor in the McDonough School of Business for over 30 years, I am the Executive Director of the Latin America Leadership Program. As a proud Venezuelan American, it is an honor for me to welcome back to Georgetown Iván Duque Márquez, current President of the Republic of Colombia, and almost as important, an alumnus of Georgetown since he graduated with a Master in Policy Management at the McCourt School of Public Policy. With its academic strength, Washington, D.C. location, Jesuit values, and regional networks, Georgetown is a leading U.S. university engaged in Latin America. Faculty and students across research and teaching programs engage critical challenges facing the region, including economic growth and innovation, governance and the rule of law, social and cultural cohesion, and hemispheric relations. Our university has deep historical ties to Latin America, reaching all the way back to 1789 founding, when the Society of Jesus had already been running universities in Spanish America for more than a century and a half. Today, Georgetown is part of a hemispheric network of Jesuit universities spanning 58 institutions. Georgetown's current engagement with Latin America spans across the Georgetown schools in the main campus, medical center, and law center. Main hubs of research, teaching, and outreach include the Center for Latin American Studies at SFS, the Latin America Leadership Program, the Center for Advancement of the Rule of Law in the Americas at the Law Center, the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and the American Initiative at the college. Regarding the region, as the third most populated country in South America and one of the longest standing democracies in Latin America, Colombia has been essential in providing solutions to the most pressing challenges of the region by promoting security, prosperity, and democratic governance across the Western Hemisphere. As we all know, the situation in the region is extremely fragile. This is President Duque's first official visit to the U.S., so we are very thankful that he has accepted our invitation to visit one of his alma maters in the company of his wife, Maria Juliana Ruiz, and other reflections on the status of critical issues in Colombia and Latin America, including democracy, security, immigration, peace, and socioeconomic growth and trade. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Center for Latin American Studies and the Colombian Law Students Association at Georgetown University Law Center, plus Colombia. To introduce President Duque, we welcome today Ana Elena Khouri, President of the Colombian Law Students Association at Georgetown University Law Center.
Good afternoon, Georgetown. My name is Ana Khouri. I'm a Colombian LLM student at Georgetown University Law Center and the president of the Colombian Law Students at Georgetown. I'm pleased to welcome you to the conversation with His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Colombia, Iván Duque Márquez, and Dean William Treanor about the policy agenda in Latin America. Before starting my presentation, I would like to thank the Latin America Leadership Program and the Center for Latin American Studies for co-hosting this event. I would like to give a special welcome to Mrs. Maria Juliana Ruiz Sandoval, the First Lady of Colombia. I also want to welcome the presidential delegation and all the members of our diplomatic corps who are here with us. I want to give a special thanks to the Consul of Colombia in Washington, D.C., Mrs. Erika Salamanca, who helping us to make this event possible. Latin America is now facing a swing in its policy agenda. New topics and concerns are nowadays on the table for Latin American leaders. On behalf of the Colombian law students in Georgetown, I'm pleased to welcome you today, one of such new leaders. President Duque graduated as a lawyer in Colombia. He earned a master's degree in public policy management from Georgetown University. Before running for president, he was a senator. During his tenure in Congress, he introduced different bills, including the Orange Economy Law for the promotion of the creative economy and the protection of our culture. He lived in D.C. for many years, where he worked at the Inter-American Development Bank. As most of us, President Duque dreamed big. He studied at Georgetown, and he worked hard to fulfill his dreams. As Colombians, we are very proud to say that President Duque is a fellow Joya. Moderating today's event is Dean William Treanor. He's a professor, executive vice president, and dean of Georgetown University Law Center. Now, it is my great honor to introduce His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Colombia, Iván Duque Márquez.
I think actually this is your chair.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you.
Well, President Duque, we're delighted to have you back at Georgetown, and I understand this is a room that has personal significance to you, that this is where you did your capstone presentation.
But you're not going to give me notes tonight.
No. But I know that Professor Joe Ferrara, who was your capstone advisor, is very proud of you. And we're really delighted to have you back.
It's a great honor for me, Dean Treanor, to be back in Georgetown. I feel the Joya spirit right here, don't we? Mm-hmm. Are there any Joyas here? So I am very happy to be here. I also want to express my gratitude for Joe Ferrara for being here today. He was my capstone director and one of the professors who really made a great influence on me for the good. And I also want to thank Ricardo Ernst, a good friend that I hadn't seen in a long time. Great to see you again, Ricardo. And Dean, I'm very happy to be back in Georgetown. And I take this opportunity to thank the school for everything that the school has done for me. I am proud to be a public policy graduate, and I always remember the lessons I took from Georgetown in my daily activities. So it's a great honor for me to be here.
Oh, that's true. Well, we're honored to have you back. We're honored that you're making us part of your really packed first visit to the United States as president. And we're also honored to have the President of Colombia because of Colombia's importance, in many ways, as an economic leader, as an example of democracy. Your election is the process of a series of peaceful transitions. And also, generally, Colombia is an example of a transition to peace from a very violent period. So we really have, as we're talking about a number of major issues, it's particularly important for us to be in dialogue with Colombia. So thank you for being here. I have a number of questions that I'll ask you, and then at the end we've gotten questions from our studio audience, and so I think the last 15 minutes or so I'll read those questions if I can. But let me start. So yesterday, you had a meeting with President Trump, and there were a number of issues that you talked about at your joint press conference. And I'd like to focus on, to begin, on two of them. You talked about drug policy, and then obviously you also talked about Venezuela. So let me start on drug policy. Colombia has been a leader in calling for a debate about drug policies at the international level, particularly at the UN and the OAS. It initiated a necessary debate about the effects of prohibitionism and the war on drugs in Latin America, and exploring regulatory alternatives based on public health and harm reduction. So what's your administration's position on drug policy?
Well, let me first begin by saying something that I found very important. The meeting we had with President Trump and also the meetings that we have had with members of Congress have been very important. Colombia has received always bipartisan support. And I think that's something that has to be praised, because Plan Colombia began in the late 90s, 1999, 2000. It was Bill Clinton who helped the Plan Colombia early beginnings. Then President Bush, President Obama, now President Trump. So I always want to praise that, because our relationship has been for a long time a brotherhood relationship. And I am very glad and pleased that we feel the support from the White House and also from Congress when it comes to face the drug problem. Now, the discussion on whether it's prohibition or if it's a different action, or if it's legalization, I think it's a broad discussion. It's not just a discussion whether you can do it internally in one country, because it requires that there's a broad international consensus. And as for today, the broad international consensus, whether we like it or not, is that the world has rejected drugs. Now, what the approach is very important, because I think public health ought to be considered, but we also have to consider the things that can affect national security and the capacity of the state in a country like Colombia. So Plan Colombia, when it was launched in 1999 to the year 2012, had a big success and was to reduce from 160,000 hectares to less than 60,000 hectares. But in the last 5 years, we have jumped from 60,000 to 200,000 hectares of coca. That means deterioration of the environment. It's one of the main causes of deforestation. That means that we have narco-trafficking structures threatening different parts of the country. And most of those organizations are in bed with the Sinaloa cartel and other cartels in other parts of the world. So when I took office, I had to take a stand. The first stand was, yes, we need to put an end to the exponential growth of the illegal crops. And we also need to consider that Colombia is no longer a producing country, we're also a consuming country. We had 800,000 people consuming drugs in Colombia, and we're a low-income country. So yes, we had to put public health, we had to put an end to the usage and carrying of personal doses in the streets, not taking people to prison, but putting fines, and it has been working. But more importantly, what I think has to be done is to have prevention as a very important tool, and to dismantle money laundering organizations, and also putting end to the cartels that are putting in danger the lives of many people. So I consider this a holistic approach, and yes, we will deliver. My goal is by the end of my administration to eradicate more than 60% of the illegal crops that we have, but more than just eradicate, make people that are living from an illegal crop be part of the legal economy of Colombia.
So could you talk some specifics? What concrete steps are you envisioning you'll take?
Well, for example, when we look at areas where we have an exponential growth, like the region of Catatumbo in the border zone with Venezuela, I was visiting there during the second day of my administration, and I saw an oil palm extracting company where 49% of the owners were former coca crop growers. And they decided to leave aside the path of illegality, and now they're working in a legal and productive industry with sustainable practices, environmental practices, labor practices. And I consider that the kind of examples that we have to set for other regions in Colombia. In the southern part of Colombia, we have been working with USAID, and we have made cocoa, sacha inchi, and other products a sustainable new alternative for those families. And when it comes to people that were involved in criminal activities, for example, with FARC after the peace process, we have launched 19 productive projects based on legal and sustainable crops with what we call contractual agriculture, so that we have companies buying their products in a sustainable way with a fixed price, with a low interest rate of credit, and also with microinsurance. I believe those things are successful, and definitely during this 3.5 years that I have for my administration, my goal is not only to reduce substantially to less than 60% the amount of illegal crops, but also have a change in those areas where violence derived from narco-trafficking have been a tragedy. And that implies bringing the private sector and creating a sustainable contractual environment of the growers and the buyers.
So a lot of your focus is on economic growth as an alternative to coca production.
Yes, but also formalization. Because, you know, when we talk about Colombia, always the conversation of drugs comes into the table. But in fact, Colombia has a very vibrant economy. I would say that one of the things that we have to praise is that during the last 20 years, Colombia passed from being considered a failed state to a vibrant economy. And I always thank the support of allies like the United States in the bipartisan way we have gotten the support. And today, the Colombian economy has one big step to make. We became a member of the OECD, but our income per capita is $7,000. I want to put Colombia in the path of becoming a high-income country. And that implies that we need to put the economy growing above 4% pretty fast. So we took decisions like lowering the tax rate on corporations, especially SMEs, and eliminate red tape, have unified taxing policies for the smallest enterprises, so they don't have to go too much with red tape, and they have a differentiated tax rate so they can formalize. And in the last trimester of 2018, we got the economy growing, and we'll announce the data pretty soon, I believe about 3.4%. And for this year, my expectations is that the economy is going to grow above 3.5%, and that would be the highest economic growth in the last 5 years, and that's a major achievement for the first year of my administration.
And that's been a big focus of yours, the economic growth.
Not only growth, but is economic growth also linked with what I call social justice. We just presented to Congress the new National Development Plan. And the National Development Plan is based on what I call a virtuous circle, that is legality plus entrepreneurship equals fairness. Legality, the rule of law, fighting corruption, fighting crime. Entrepreneurship, we need to have more SMEs, more startups. We want to have the creative economy playing a big role, science, technology, renewable energies, and we have made regulation decisions to empower those sectors. But the end of the story, the consequences of legality plus entrepreneurship is fairness, and this is where we're going to make the biggest bet. We are going to have this year the largest education budget in Colombian history, where we plan to pass from 4 to 7 million students that are receiving daily meals with the micronutrients they need for their prefrontal cortex of the brain in order to be able to learn better. And we are going to pass from 1 million to 2 million children with full early childhood attention. Those are big reforms. But when it comes to the biggest number, by the year 2022, we expect to get out of poverty 1.5 million people from extreme poverty and 3.4 million people from poverty into what I call the emerging middle class. Those are the numbers that we want to get with the right combination of policies in this administration.
So now, one of the things you mentioned was your focus on the creative economy, and you've written about that. Can you talk more about what your vision is and how you see that as part of the larger economic focus?
Well, when I graduated from Georgetown in 2007, I remember that I had a conversation with Joe Ferrara, and he told me, what are you going to do next? So I said, I'm going to work at the IDB, but I really want to have a shift in my career. Well, that shift took 4 years to make it, because since then I started reading some of the theories by Ken Robinson about what he called the STEAM education: science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And I started reading the reports on the creative industries in Great Britain, and I said, well, this is what I want to do next. And I decided to start writing public policy articles about the creative economy, and I found out that in a country like the US, the creative economy is more than 9% of GDP. In a country like Great Britain, it's more than 11%. In Germany, it's 9%. And then I thought, what's going on in Latin America, and what's going on in Colombia? And the conclusion that I got is that the creative economy has been growing, facing all the difficulties, and nobody has realized that in a country like Colombia, it's 3 times bigger in the contribution to GDP than the coffee sector. Or even 1.1% bigger, 1.1 times bigger than the mining economy of Colombia. So we needed to have the right policies, the right regulations, and the right enhancers. So when I decided to run for office, became a senator, I launched a bill. We got the bill approved, and now as president, I'm putting this together because my goal is to make it jump to 6% of GDP in 4 years. And we started with one simple decision that I think requires audacity. We presented in the economic reactivation plan 0 income tax for creative industries, for startup in the creative industries, as long as a minimum amount of jobs are generated, and as long as you embed up to a cap. But I am pretty certain that this is going to have more dynamism. And the same thing happens with the technology sector, because it's somehow intertwined with the orange economy. We have now in Medellin, and we launched this a few weeks ago, the first 4th Industrial Revolution Center in a Spanish-speaking country in Medellin, in Colombia, to work on artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and also blockchain. The integration of technology and the creative economy, if you ask me, I think is going to be the next industrial revolution in Colombia.
And then on trade, what's your policy? On trade,
I had this conversation this morning in the IDB, and we tend to talk about a lot about trade when it comes to technocratic or academic environments. But when we look at the results in Latin America, I think there are 2 things that they don't really make me happy. The first one is that intra-regional trade is tiny. And if you don't have a larger intra-regional trade, you will always be exposed to external shocks. So the right way to minimize and to adopt and to prevent external shocks is to have more trade within our region. So my first policy is to enhance what we call the Pacific Alliance, try to build a coalition of the Pacific Alliance where you have Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Chile with Mercosur, so we can broaden the market. And we can get at least to 30% of our trade be intra-regional. And the second thing in a country like Colombia is that trade or exports as a percentage of GDP in Colombia is just 16%. Compared to Mexico, to Chile, to Peru, we're staying back. So we definitely need to expand the weight of exports to GDP. How do we do that? We also need to broaden the export basket. So that's why creative industries play a role, services play a role, and industrial exports play a role. And I am very happy that in the first 4 months of the administration, we got non-traditional exports to grow 8.9%. So those are the kinds of things we want to put together. And last but not least, eliminate the red tape that sometimes affects being successful when it comes to trade. We have here the Minister of Trade, and in the 4 months of our administration, we eliminated, we rationalized, and we digitalized more than 100 procedures. And it is all producing a positive impact on allowing people to export. So those are the kinds of things that are part of my strategy. And I have said that I will not sign or negotiate new agreements until we have really taken advantages of the markets that we have already developed.
And what role does trade with the United States play in your vision?
Well, the United States is our major trading partner. We have more than 40% of our exports coming to the U.S. The U.S. is also the first source of foreign direct investment. We have a trade deficit with the U.S. of around $1.5 billion, but I think that's compensated by other things. For example, we get regularly $2 billion or more of foreign direct investment per year. We also receive something close to 600,000 U.S. tourists to Colombia. The U.S. play a very important role in portfolio investments in the country. But definitely we need to have more trade, and we want to expand the trade basket. One of the things that I'm requesting from the U.S. that will have an impact on the areas that have been affected by violence to have more admissibility of products. It took us 4 years to get the Hass avocado entered the U.S. market. And we need to shorten those times. And my goal is to at least get 90 products on the road of admissibility during my administration.
So now let me turn from economics to Venezuela. What should be done? What are the next steps?
Well, this has been my moral stand, and this has been a moral cause for many years. And I remember that when I was a senator, I was always pushing to have resolutions against the Maduro regime, and sometimes I got some criticism by someone who said, why are you getting so involved in Venezuela? You should think more about what's going on in Colombia. And I said, you know what? At the end, this is simpler than you think. What would you do if you were living in a condo and your neighbor next door every single night is beating his wife and his children, and you hear the screams through the walls? Would you wake up next day and just pretend everything is okay and say hi in the elevator and be gentle? Or you should denounce what is morally wrong? So when I was a senator, I denounced Nicolas Maduro before the International Criminal Court. I got the support of 77 members of my Congress, 56 members of the Chilean Parliament. People didn't believe we were going anywhere, and we got a previous investigation going on. And I said, when I ran for the presidency, that if I became the president of Colombia, I will call other heads of state to join me in that action. And now we have 9 heads of state who are requesting that investigation and a formal accusation to happen. So this is a moral stand. And as of today, I always said that we needed to create a diplomatic blockade. We have now most of the countries in the Western Hemisphere recognizing Juan Guaidó as the president. Now we have most of the European countries. And yes, we have to keep on strengthening that diplomatic blockade. And now we need to make a call so that there are defections in the Venezuelan army. Some of the leaders start pledging loyalty to Juan Guaidó as the genuine president of Venezuela. And I've seen some members of the media asking me, do you think this is going to last? Do you think Maduro will stay? I don't think we should be discussing that. We should do everything we can to let the Venezuelan people liberate from the most brutal dictatorship we have seen in years. And this is a moral cause. And as president of Colombia, I will continue promoting the diplomatic blockade to get Venezuelan people free of Nicolas Maduro.
So, So what will happen?
I was very impressed because at the end of last year, I gave a couple of interviews talking about the diplomatic blockade. And then many people thought, you know, this is crazy. What kind of diplomatic blockade can happen? But in January the 4th, the Lima Group, this group that was created by more than 14 countries in Latin America, met and we signed a declaration. And I want to also highlight the work of our Minister of Foreign Relations, Carlos Holmes, who's here with us, because in that declaration, the first thing we have ever seen in Latin America as a diplomatic blockade initiated. Because Maduro was supposed to take his oath of office on January the 10th. He was left alone. And most of the countries did not recognize him as the legitimate president of Venezuela. We also recognize the National Assembly as the only legitimate democratic entity or power in Venezuela. And we called for Juan Guaidó to assume the presidency and call for elections and a presidential transition, democratic transition. I think that was a major step. And then, since that day, then the OAS came. And then, few weeks ago, all the countries of the Lima Group, gave the legitimacy to Juan Guaidó as president. The European countries have also been supporting him. And in the last week, I saw one of the most respectful journalists in Latin America saying that the diplomatic blockade is the way, and now the defections are about to happen. Well, the first defection came with one colonel who was the chief strategist of the Air Force, who withdrew his support from Maduro, assumed the loyalty of Juan Guaidó as president, and left the country. So if you ask me, I think the National Assembly and other countries should offer different treatments to the military who decide to support Guaidó. And I think this is about to happen in a domino effect in the following days.
So do you think there'll be a transition soon?
I am sure. Maduro will try always to bluff and to try to make people believe that he has real power. I don't know if he's going to last a day, a week, a month, or 2 months. But I think what the world is seeing now does not have any reverse. This blockade is giving hope to the Venezuelan people. And now his latest mistake is trying to obstruct the entrance of humanitarian aid. And on February the 23rd, President Guaidó is calling to have a caravan of humanitarian aid to enter Venezuela. I am telling everyone, and I think all of us should give the message that on the 23rd of February, the world is going to do anything we can to let the humanitarian aid enter Venezuela. And I'm pretty certain that the military forces are going to allow the humanitarian aid to enter and protect the people. And that will be the beginning of the end of Nicolás Maduro as a dictator of Venezuela.
And would you envision military intervention as a possibility at some point?
I got that question today, and I said that I was not good at interpreting notepads. So, no, I have always believed that the military option has been always a creation in the mind of Maduro to try to demonize some of the countries who are calling him to step out. I think the diplomatic blockade and what I consider the domino effect of defections in the Venezuelan army are the most important tools that we have. And I don't think raising the issue of military intervention is helpful, but I also think that it's very clear that the world tells Nicolás Maduro that trying to obstruct the entrance of humanitarian aid is a crime against humanity. So he has to feel that as well.
So let me ask, in terms of the precedent, when is it that the leader of a country should be subject to diplomatic immunity? What's the test?
No, for me, diplomatic immunity, in the sense of the conversations that we're having about behaviors like crimes against humanity, I don't believe in any immunity for those kinds of things.
I'm sorry, I meant the diplomatic blockade that you're
The
talking
diplomatic blockade. The diplomatic blockade is a tool that nobody thought was going to be viable. But in order for the diplomatic blockade to work, there had to be a change in Venezuela. And I think the biggest change was that the National Assembly decided to unite again and to identify who could be the leader that could make this transition possible. And I haven't had the privilege to meet him personally, but I consider Juan Guaidó a hero. And sometimes heroes appear in the right moment, at the right time, in the right place. I think he's a courageous man. I think he's a brave man. I think he's a genuine and true patriot. And I think this is going to be the leader that is going to help this transition happen. So we all have to give him support. A guy who has decided to be in the streets facing a brutal dictatorship for a change? Imagine what has happened in Venezuela. The dictatorship has derailed the economy, has destroyed the institution, have impoverished the whole country, and we see millions of inflation rate? That's insane. People are dying. Well, this guy stood up to the moment. And now what the world cannot do is let the power and the force of the Venezuelan people in the streets fade away. So that's why we have to be close to him. That's why, as Colombians, not only we have received our brothers from Venezuela, more than 1.2 million, but we also have to do everything in our power to let the humanitarian aid enter Venezuela. So Colombia and the rest of the Western Hemisphere need to give a strong message in favor of Juan Guaidó. I think the European Union should do the same. And if the regime of Nicolas Maduro keeps on trying to obstruct the access of humanitarian aid, I think this, as a crime against humanity, needs a strong rejection, not only from the OAS, but from the United Nations. And that will imply that if he doesn't let the humanitarian aid enter Venezuela, he has to have an immediate sanction by the International Criminal Court.
Now, let me ask you, the 1.2 million refugees, how are you able to handle so many people?
It's complicated. It's complicated. I remember that when I took office, one of the biggest challenges in the analysis we made was that 1.2 million migrants in less than 2 years has economic effects, social effects. Last week, I spoke with Angela Merkel by phone, and we're talking about the figures. And she received 1.5 Syrian refugees in a period of 5 years, 4 years, and it costed 1% of GDP to Germany, that is a country that has an income per capita above $27,000. Colombia has received 1.2 million Venezuelan brothers in less than 2 years, and we have an income per capita of $7,000. So the challenge is big, yes it is. But I said that it is our moral duty, first of all, to express fraternity. And the second thing, to recognize that in the 20th century, many Colombians went to Venezuela in the search for hope, and the Venezuelan brothers opened their arms and received them. So we will do all in our hands to be well organized, to help with the migration system. And obviously the biggest challenge that we face, I think, is healthcare. Because the Maduro regime has not vaccinated in 5 years children. We were a country free of chicken pox, and last year we had 412 cases because there were children that were coming to Colombia without vaccination. So we have to act. We have called the international community to provide funds, and we have been receiving funds. We now have some instruments, and I think we have to put everything together. Now, the reason why I'm so keen that we need to all unite to get Maduro out of the government is because the major source of this humanitarian crisis and this migration crisis is the dictatorship. If the dictatorship that does not come to an end, 3 years down the road, we might not have 1.2 million, but 2. And then the effect is going to be even more complex. So I think this is the moment. We have to seek the moment, and we have to be all united to make all the pressure we can. We have students here. We have leaders from the university here. The heads of state, we have been doing our work. But we also need to make this a world movement. We need to have people in their social networks. We need to have people in the media. We need to have people in academia, everything, putting pressure and make this cause as it was the cause in the 1980s to liberate Mandela, or as it was to save Darfur. This has to be a global effort. And I think together, thinking on the 23rd of February, we have to say, Maduro, your time has come to leave Venezuela.
You make a very powerful case about the course of action that you're pursuing. There's one other topic I want to touch on before I open up questions. The peace accords with FARC. What do you see as the challenges? What do you see as the strengths? What will you be doing differently moving forward?
When I run for the presidency, and you know that sometimes in politics, and especially in the days of fake news, people sometimes try to oversimplify statements or visions. So I was accused by some of my contenders as an enemy of peace, which I'm not and which I have never been. But I always said that peace requires legality, no impunity, and the right measures. Since the day I took office, I was very clear that the people that genuinely are in the path of reincorporating from criminal activities, we want them to succeed. We want to give them the opportunity. That's why we have launched the productive projects. That's why we have worked with them to eliminate illegal crops. That's why we have also put together the regional development plans that are part of the accords and that are linked with the National Development Plan, thinking on the long term. But I must be honest, we also have to be tough with the people that want to go back to criminal activities. There were people who were dissidents of FARC, for example, a guy so-called Huacho, who killed 3 Ecuadorian journalists who was in bed with the Sinaloa cartel. He was working in the Pacific Basin of Colombia, and he was an absolute criminal. We looked for him, we found him, and in a military operation, he was killed. There was another guy called, so-called Rodrigo Cadete, a very dangerous man. He was controlling drug businesses in the southern part of the country. And yes, we also fought against his organization. He was killed in a military operation, and some of the members of his group were taken to justice. But that means that we are going to also be very tough with the people that want to go back to criminal activities. But I also feel that the greatest challenge has to do with justice. I have the expectation that the transitional justice will, in effect, guarantee truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. But there are many victims who will want to see their reparation in the form of a proportional justice. So I look forward for that transitional justice to really deliver on that. Because if there's impunity, I think that could become a great danger for Colombia, because many people will believe that justice was not really a reality and that it was all a con.
So let me, there's a lot to pursue on that, but there's one specific follow-up I wanted to touch on before I go to the questions from the audience. Georgetown's Institute for Women, Peace, and Security recently released a report on the role women played in the Colombia peace process. So what particular role do you see women playing in the critical current and future challenges facing Colombia?
When I ran for the presidency, I remember that we made an exercise with a group of friends, and we analyzed previous presidential programs on the rights of women. And I can tell you that most of the programs said, in our administration, we will empower women to be a source of social transformation. And I said, well, I don't want to have the same old. I really want to make a difference. And I said that if I was elected the candidate of my party, I would look to have the first women vice president in Colombia's history. And I'm glad to tell you that I am very happy to have a person like Marta Lucía Ramírez being the first women vice president of Colombia. And I also said that I wanted to have the first parity cabinet in my country. And we have established the first parity cabinet in Colombia. 42% of the vice ministers of Colombia are women. 60% of the superintendents are women. And that is a demonstration that, yes, we want to empower women to be leaders in Colombia. And I want to see now the private sector doing the same thing. Because sometimes I get the applauses from the private sector, but when it comes to board of directors don't have a parity policy. When you look at the top 20 corporations in Colombia, or the top 50, the ones that have a women CEO are very few. So the changes have to come from the private sector, but also from the public sector, and also from academia. Those are the kinds of challenges we want to embrace, and those are the changes we want to be committed. But there's something that worries me, and it is machismo in Latin America. Sometimes when we face violence against women, I see that the policy approach is always to, let's provide women the right advisory. Let's create the right centers to attend the needs of women. But you know what? Nobody is realizing that if we really want to make a change on the rights of women, we have to educate men differently, with respect to women. And those are the things that we want
to change. It's very powerful.
Thank you, Dean.
So now let me, I'm going to read some of the questions from our audience. And if it's your question, I'd like you to stand up. From Cristina Cuervo Rengifo.
Cristina.
And Cristina writes, have you thought of capitalizing on the talent of the Colombian diaspora? If so, how?
Yes. And I lived in the United States for almost 13 years. I traveled throughout different places in the United States, and I got to meet very talented people from the diaspora. I don't feel that the theory of the 80s, where people said that those are fled away brains, has to happen in the 21st century, because we have the technology and we have the capabilities to make people actively participate. And yes, with our Ministry of Foreign Relations, we want to make easier for people to come back to Colombia if they want to come back, but also to actively participate in different processes and activities in Colombia. We just launched a group of we call it savios, savvy persons and savvy persons, who are going to work on the development of science and technology. And we have a combination of people from diaspora and people that are in Colombia, and even we invited people from other countries. So yes, I want to continually invite the Colombian diaspora to participate. We have a big diaspora in the creative industries that can be very helpful to Colombia. And I also believe that the diaspora needs to have instruments to be connected to Colombia, so that people can invest in the country easily, or that they can participate in academia easily. That's why we want to homologize university titles in a fast way, so people don't graduate from Georgetown and have to wait 2 years to get their title homologized to be able to work for the government. We're trying to simplify all that. So yes, the talent of the diaspora is something that I value and that I consider a very important tool for the development of Colombia.
Very good. Next question from the Vice President of the Venezuelan Perspectives, Georgetown, Juan Cabella. Okay, Juan.
Thanks to God you clarified, because I say, oh, the Vice President is here.
Juan writes.
Where's Juan? Juan, un placer.
Considering that many of us aspire to be like you, what can you tell us that made you stand out from your Georgetown class And what advice can you give us to emerge in the political field?
When I was in Georgetown and I was in the public policy school, I had great teachers that I had a tremendous respect. Joe Ferrara is here, but I also had E.J. Dion. He was a great professor of mine. I had Professor Campbell, and I had another professor, I don't remember his last name, Jason Mandel from the School of Security, International Security Studies. They all made a great influence on me, and when I was in those classes, I realized that after I graduated, I wanted to be in the path of public service. When I was a student, I was also working at the IDB, representing Colombia at the board of directors. And even though most of the knowledges or the learnings that I took from the school were more technocratic, at the end, I decided that you really need to enter politics, because you cannot just be dependent on who appoints you to a certain position. You have to be in the field, you have to be in the arena, you have to get the human touch. You need to get to the people and motivate the people to do things differently and join you in a cause. So yes, the university had a very high impact on me on considering that it's not just knowledge, it's also participating actively in politics. So I know there are many brilliant people in this room who are about to graduate, who are doing their postgraduate studies. My call to you is, all this knowledge is valuable in public service, but it is more valuable if you use it also in politics. If you use it in the streets, connecting to the people, selling and sending and inviting to the right message. So I will also tell you, Dean, that maybe the class that I did not have was about electoral politics. I had to learn that in the streets and walking and getting elected. But I think the people who are here, this great school, this is a school that has opened the doors to many international students, and many Latin American international students should be considered as the birth of the new political class of Latin America. I've met people from Venezuela here who I believe need to see not my example, but the example of Juan Guaidó in its own country and go back and work for Venezuela in the reconstruction of Venezuela. And that's my invitation. Search for that call. Respond to that call. And consider that public policy knowledge is very important, but it's more important if you apply it in the politics as the right way of making things happen and changing the status quo in our countries.
That's right. And that really resonates with the core mission of Georgetown, women and men for others. And it's a great question and a great answer. Actually, let me just follow up on that last thing, because Abduli, a graduate student?
Where's Abduli?
Okay.
Abduli, how are you?
So you talked about bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. So Abduli writes, how do you plan to close the gap between the rich and the poor? Do you have any new policy that you'll be pursuing?
I think things sometimes are obvious, but let me go to education. And maybe take a couple of minutes or 2 minutes to respond to this. The gaps, the big gaps, begin in education. When I was working as a senator, I made a presentation about the two lines in a race, where you have the low-income child and you have the high-income child, the child from a high-income family. The kid from the low-income family in a country like Colombia does not get integral early childhood attention or coverage, does not have the possibility to go to a preschool. If he goes to a school, he will only go on average 4 hours because he's half journey, and then maybe in a very few occasions he might be able to finish school and then go to the university. Well, the kid from the high-income family He's born, he gets all the micronutrients from early stage. He gets omega-3, he gets zinc, he gets vitamin C, he gets everything he needs for the prefrontal cortex of the brain to be developed. Then most of the time he goes to a preschool. Then he goes to a school that has great infrastructure, bilingual tuition. He has the laboratories, he has the music room, he has all the sports capabilities. And then he goes there for 7 hours, and maybe he has extra time, and most of the time he goes to the university. So how do you close the gap? That's where you start, and those are the kinds of reforms that we want to make, and those are the reforms that we have put in place. So by the year 2022, my expectation is to have 300,000 kids going to free public universities that are from the poorest families of Colombia. That's why we want to duplicate the amount of children that have full attention in early childhood from 1 million to 2 million. And that's why we want to duplicate the amount of children that go to school for 7 hours in a single journey, and also giving them the possibility to graduate as high school graduates, and also with technical capacities that can be used to find a job. Those are the kinds of reforms that I think are useful to close the gaps. I will mention more. But I think if we close the gap of education, where the race of these two lines is put in a fairness context, I think we will be able to change Colombia for the good and expand the middle class and think of becoming a high-income country in the next 2 decades. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. Actually, I think that's a great way to end. I think that's very powerful. And I just want to say, once again, Mr. President, we're honored that you have joined us on your first trip back to the United States, and we hope you come back soon.
Thank you so much, Dean. I am proud to be a Joya, and I want to send always my gratitude to all the Joyas that are here that are going to go back to Latin America and make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.